college, and this year was especially difficult given the unexpected health expenses of my family. I have long dreamed of pursuing grad studies in public policy, especially in the education field, but with the cancellation of the Grad Plus loan program, my path just feels uncertain. And I know that I am not alone. These changes affect more than just me. They ripple across so many communities. Over the summer, I joined a youth round.
Okay, that's fine. Oh my.
list of people. Everyone. Thank you all for being here to discuss our continuing work to protect our country's students, families, and educators as we fight back against this regime's attacks on education. This is the third education spotlight hearing I am conducting, and I really want to thank each of you and those of you in the audience. We do have some video testimony also, but for each of you for being here, because what we're seeing this regime do is an all-out coordinated assault on public education, from targeting the Department of Education's workforce and funding to establishing the nation's first ever national school voucher program. Trump has been relentlessly trying to undermine education and cut crucial programs that students and our families rely upon. Now, if Trump could do it, he would just completely wipe out the Department of Education altogether, but even he realizes that only Congress, which created the Department of Education, can do that, but he and his administration is doing everything they can to move money around, to cut funding, to do all kinds of things to weaken the Department of Education and support for K-12, as well as post-high school. So he's not stopping at just K-12. He wants to get at weakening the support we provide to students who want to go on after high school. So he is actively working with Republicans to block access to post-secondary education and future career opportunities for working and middle-class students. And the reason I talk about working and middle-class students is that they are the ones who are more likely than other economic groups to suffer from the kinds of changes that they want to make to the federal student loan program. So first, Trump's draconian reduction in workforce at the Department of Education in March includes the firing of hundreds staff from the Federal Student Aid Office, and these mass layoffs have led to reported disruptions in the office's ability to assist students, sabotaging yet another stream of federal support for our country's youth. And we all know that there are millions and millions of student borrowers living in every state in the country, and they're some of the top states with student borrowers would be with over 1 million student borrowers. Texas, Florida, California. I know you know, you're nodding your heads. What are the other states that have over 1 million borrowers?
Probably New York.
New York, yes, okay, so millions. So as a result, students working to pursue their post-secondary education will receive less financial assistance, especially those, again, from working and middle-class backgrounds. Additionally, Trump and Republicans' destructive tax bill, I call it the 1,000 pages of pain bill, or we can call it the big ugly bill, will reduce the amount of payment options available to student loan borrowers and decrease the cap on how much a student can borrow by thousands of dollars. This will not only change the way students pay for their education, but it may prevent many from accessing higher education altogether. As students and their families navigate the rising cost of living and unprecedented economic uncertainty, and we already know things like the cost of food keeps going up, the cost of healthcare is going to dramatically increase. All kinds of things are happening, lots of economic uncertainty, but these attacks on higher education, which is our focus today, makes it even more expensive and difficult to these families to afford to send their kids to college. Students are then forced to decide to forego higher education or turn to the private student loan market, accruing thousands of dollars, probably more, than in the federally supported student loan program in unnecessary debt. And make no mistake, these attacks on higher education and attacks on the middle class, because it makes it harder for people to get the support they need to send their kids to college. So it's all intentional. You know, some would say that President Trump wants to keep our people from getting and being educated. And one should ask, why would any president want a country made up of people who are not educated? It's certainly cause for concern. So, of course, when you have people less educated and skilled workforce, it makes it a lot harder for them to get jobs. So, for example, teacher shortage in our country, doctors, another teacher shortage, especially primary care doctors, nurses, the first responders, the list goes on. How are we supposed to encourage our youth, the future of this country, to pursue higher education, to reach their career goals and strengthen our country's workforce, when we have a president that is actively taking federal support away from our students? That is more than a rhetorical question. Today's forum is an opportunity to hear from experts about Trump and Republicans' policies and the negative implications they will have on the future of higher education. And I would say that when you attack education, you are attacking the future of our country. So I look forward to hearing all of your testimony. You are experts today, and thank you once again for being here. And I do have an introduction for each of you. So as you all know, this is being live streamed, and I'm glad that people in our country, American people, will have access to the information you're providing, because as I said, there are millions and millions of people who have been helped by the federal, the student loan program, and how they're going to be impacted by the big, ugly bill. I'm going to start by introducing Ms. Aisha Canchola Banez. So Ms. Banez is the policy director for Protect Borrowers, apt name, formerly the Student Borrower Protection Center, which is a leading national nonprofit advocating for student borrowers. In this capacity, she oversees the organization's work advancing policies to support borrowers. As such, she is a nationally recognized leader on these issues. She previously served as legislative director and deputy chief of staff for Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley in the House, and as a policy advisor on the Senate Health Committee. That is our Education and Health Committee in the Senate, and welcome. Next, we have Ms. Garza. Ms. Roxan Garza is the Director of Higher Education Policy at Ed Trust, a leading national nonprofit committed to advancing policies and practices designed to dismantle racial economic barriers in the American education system. And in this role, she leads the organization's efforts to inform and develop policies that better support underserved post-secondary students. She previously served as the chief of staff for the Department of Education's Office of Post-Secondary Education, where she led initiatives, directed strategy, and advanced policy at the department. She has also served in leadership roles at other education-focused organizations. I should also mention that, like many of us here, including me, she is a first-generation college graduate. Welcome. Next, we have Dr. Kuster. Dr. Bradley Kuster is a higher education policy expert based in Washington, D.C. Until recently, he served as an analyst in the Education Department's Ombudsman's Office within the Office of Federal Student Aid, FSA, where he resolved complex complaints from student borrowers. And with the changes in the big ugly bill, even more complex questions arise, with fewer people to answer them, by the way. So he also previously worked as a researcher at the Center for American Progress and as an administrator on public college and university campuses. As such, he has a deep understanding of the importance of FSA, and particularly what it means for borrowers to have a fully staffed offices. Welcome. Then we finally have, Ms. Mary Modika. She is a 7th grade English as a second language, which I can relate to since English is my second language, educator from Spring Valley, New York. In addition, she is also a student borrower who was affected by the Great Recession. This was in the 2008 timeframe, which required her to take on a significant amount of student debt. We look forward to hearing her story. Welcome to each of you. Now we'll start with witness testimony from Ms. Canchola Bañez. Please begin.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Good afternoon.
I would like to thank Senator Hirono for the invitation and the opportunity to testify today. My name is Aisha Canchola Bañez, and I'm the Policy Director at Protect Borrowers, a national nonprofit fighting to build an economy where debt does not limit opportunity. It's an honor to speak before you today about the rising costs facing Americans seeking to better themselves through a higher education and the catastrophic consequences of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act for students.
You can call it the Big Ugly Bill.
AKA the Big Ugly Bill.
Yes, that's more apt.
We know that America thrives when it invests in its people. And nowhere is this more true than fulfilling the promise of affordable higher education. Yet for too long, that promise has been systemically broken, shattered by soaring college costs, exacerbated by unstable state budgets, the diminishing purchasing power of the Pell Grant, and the proliferation of high-debt, low-quality programs, particularly in the for-profit college industry. As a result, today, millions of Americans are crushed under the weight of a $1.7 trillion student debt crisis. But make no mistake, this crisis is a policy choice. Policymakers over the past half-century have allowed our public higher education system to become increasingly privatized, forcing students and families to bear the growing financial burden of what should be a public good. Unfortunately, the recently enacted One Big Ugly Bill will only make matters worse. Instead of making long overdue investments in need-based aid so that students can go to college without having to take on massive loads of debt, the new law guts access to federal financial aid, makes repayment more onerous, and will almost certainly force states to cut higher education budgets to account for massive cuts to health care and federal food assistance. The bill also eliminates loan programs that students have relied on to pursue graduate and professional level studies and places rigid caps on how much students and families can borrow. Proponents of these lending caps argue that by limiting federal aid, schools will be forced to lower decades' worth of price hikes. However, data has shown that this is simply not the case. Instead, students and families will be simply pushed into more expensive, riskier, predatory private student loan debt, or be forced to forego their educational dreams altogether. For example, we estimate that between 30 and 50% of Parent Plus borrowers may be forced to turn to the private market as a result of the new annual lending limits. As a result, a typical parent could be forced to pay $1,300 in additional interest over the life of their loan. Students forced to replace their Graduate Plus loan with a private loan could expect to pay over $10,000 in additional interest alone and could see their monthly student loan costs skyrocket. But that is only if they are lucky enough to qualify. Low-income students and students of color who are unable to meet the strict underwriting requirements established by lenders like Sallie Mae could be forced to pursue products offered by the growing, opaque, and loosely regulated shadow student debt market. These products come with even higher interest rates, costly junk fees, and subject borrowers to abusive debt collection practices. On top of this, the One Big Ugly Bill raises costs for millions of federal student loan borrowers. By gutting repayment options, new borrowers will be left with only two plans to repay their loans, a new standard plan and a more expensive repayment assistance plan, or RAP, which imposes minimum payments on even the lowest income borrowers and extends repayment terms to 30 years. A typical borrower with a bachelor's degree could pay over $4,000 more per year under RAP compared to the SAVE plan. And after July 1, 2028, current borrowers will be forced off of more affordable IDR plans and into the RAP plan or the income-based repayment plan. As a result, the typical borrower in this circumstance could pay over $3,400 more per year. As we stand on the brink of millions of new defaults, the loss of longtime borrower protections such as $0 payments for the lowest income borrowers and deferments for those who lose their job or experience economic hardship will make the delinquency and default crisis even worse. At the same time Congress is squeezing borrowers and families, lawmakers slashed Medicaid and cut nearly $200 billion from SNAP. These cuts will not just leave 1 in 8 students without health care and exacerbate hunger for the 4 in 10 students experiencing food insecurity, they will strain state budgets, likely resulting in deep cuts to public higher education. And ultimately, students and families will pay the price through tuition increases and cuts to essential services. All of this has happened while the Trump administration has relentlessly attacked higher education, forced chaos, cuts, and confusion upon student loan borrowers, and gutted the very agencies whose job it is to protect them. It is clear the new law will wreak economic havoc on millions of students and families, and none of this was accidental. President Trump and his allies in Congress chose to bankroll trillions of dollars in tax cuts for billionaires and the biggest corporations on the backs of students and families across this country. And as a result, millions could see their college dreams pushed out of reach, and millions of working families could be forced to drown in even more debt. Thank you, Senator, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Garza?
Can you hear me? Yes, it's on? Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Hirono, for the opportunity to speak before you today on this important issue. My name is Roxan Garza. I'm the Director of Higher Education Policy at EdTrust, a national nonprofit organization focused on closing opportunity gaps and advancing racial and economic justice in education. EdTrust believes that education is not just a pathway to opportunity, it's a civil right. Since January, we have seen ongoing attacks on our nation's college students and higher education system. EdTrust has focused on working with partners to defend the students who are the most negatively impacted by these grant cancellations, funding cuts, and policy changes. Students of color, students from low-income backgrounds, English learners, and students with disabilities. This administration's withholding of funds has caused disruptions to vital programs. The new policies passed in the reconciliation bill will limit educational access and make student debt less manageable for borrowers. Extrajudicial interpretations of law and process are chilling the recruitment and support of students of color. The draconian cuts proposed by both the President and House majority, if implemented, would hurt students and families across this country. It is imperative that we all stand together and push back on these threats to millions of students pursuing higher education. At present, there's roughly $410 billion taxpayer dollars that are being withheld by this administration. Of that number, roughly $2.3 billion are educational programs that have experienced unilateral termination of existing grants, the continued withholding of FY25 funds, or both. These actions, in addition to threatening Congress's constitutional power of the purse, are damaging to historically underserved students' ability to access affordable and high-quality education. Every program they freeze is another door slammed shut on students who worked hard to get where they are. The recent terminations of Title III and Title V grants for institutions serving students of color is especially pernicious, as is the delayed release and partial cancellation of funds for the C-Campus program that supports student parents, the freezing and canceling of funds to train and support teacher preparation and fund student support programs. These funding freezes and cancellations are reinforced by unpopular budget proposals which would gut the Department of Education and permanently terminate funding for many of the same programs they are crippling now. The Trump budget proposal would defund all the programs previously mentioned, in addition to slashing the maximum Pell Award and implementing a 15% overall cut to the federal education budget. The House proposal takes a very similar approach. These proposals don't just cut numbers, they cut opportunity. They kill dreams and threaten our economic growth. Public polling repeatedly shows that Americans want more federal spending on education programs, not less. These cuts are widely out of touch with the current realities facing today's students, and they must be rejected. In addition to these funding restrictions, the Trump administration has started rulemaking on the provisions contained in the reconciliation bill passed this summer. Changes to student loan repayment will increase monthly payments for the majority of borrowers and push forgiveness farther away, increasing the risk of default, especially for low-income borrowers. Cuts to graduate education lending will result in students being forced to take out loans from the private banks with more onerous terms, and some students will decline to pursue graduate education altogether. The bill also weakened important borrower protections that protected millions of students from predatory institutions and practices. These policies don't result in financial responsibility, it's generational theft. We urge members to submit comments and propose legislation reform and eliminate burdens for students created by these new policies. Finally, the Trump administration has acted in unprecedented ways to leverage federal research dollars via an opaque task force operating outside the parameters of the adjudication process laid out in the Civil Rights Act, to undermine academic freedom, and to overinterpret the Supreme Court ruling banning race-conscious college admissions to significantly curtail the recruitment of Black and Latino students, especially those who are undocumented, into higher education. Students of color now make up 45% of student enrollment in college and universities. Dismantling these programs and services that support their academic success and well-being will only deepen racial and economic inequities, widen achievement gaps, and weaken the nation's workforce. We stand in opposition to these policies, but also urge leaders to continue lifting up popular solutions for affordable and accessible higher education. The path is clear. We need more Pell Grants and financial aid, real student supports that meet the needs of today's diverse student body and reflect the American creed of justice for all. We need a pathway to debt-free college. These aren't radical solutions. They are common sense. Students deserve a higher ed system that prepares them for the future, for the workforce, enables them to contribute to their communities, and achieve their dreams. Amidst the many threats facing our students, it's essential that we articulate and fight for a proactive vision for the future. EdTrust stands ready to partner with you on this important work, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kuster.
Good afternoon, Senator, and thank you for inviting me to testify. The theme of my remarks will be chaos, including how dismantling the U.S. Department of Education destabilizes the foundation of higher education in this country, and how the new provisions passed by Congress will disrupt the ability of Americans to pursue higher education. My name is Dr. Bradley Kuster, and until August 1st, I was a career civil servant in the Office of Federal Student Aid at the U.S. Department of Education. I was terminated along with thousands of other federal workers as part of the Trump administration's reduction in force, which several courts have found to be illegal. Many of us continue to hold on to hope that someday the U.S. government and our elected officials will formally acknowledge that what happened to us was wrong, that it was not in the interest of the American people, and that the mass firing of federal workers can never happen again. I worked in the Ombudsman office where I identified populations of student loan borrowers who needed extra help from their government to navigate complicated programs. I helped Americans with disabilities access their statutory right to student debt relief after student loan servicing companies mishandled their applications. I helped victims of identity theft to clear their names after fraudsters stole their financial aid and saddled them with student loans that weren't theirs. And I helped public service workers jump through what used to be impossible hoops to get the student loan forgiveness that they earned. My teammates and I made substantial progress on making things better for student loan borrowers, but that progress is at risk following the mass firings. Of the roughly 63 staff members in my former office as of January, only about 17 remain today. I've heard from borrowers and advocates that they can't get responses from the Ombudsman office anymore, and the complaints are piling up to the tune of 27,000, according to the findings of Senator Warren's investigation last month. As a result, some staff who weren't fired are leaving because of the untenable work environment. Forcing out the experts who prided themselves on helping hundreds of people every year is not efficient. It's self-inflicted chaos. During my time at Federal Student Aid, I witnessed mountains being moved. The department made huge improvements to the public service loan forgiveness program, resulting in millions of borrowers getting long overdue forgiveness. It cleaned up badly kept repayment records for borrowers on income-driven repayment plans, resulting in even more forgiveness. And it rolled out a transformed FAFSA. It took hundreds of dedicated public servants to make all that happen, and I watch now as the Education Department fails to keep up with its obligations. For example, financial aid administrators at colleges are reporting poor responsiveness from the department, system failures, and severe delays in the processes they need to administer financial aid to students as they return to campuses this fall. It's clear that our nation's students will pay the price for this chaos. Now, as the greatly diminished education department prepares to implement all the new changes from the big ugly bill, as you called it, its first priority must be sorting out income-driven repayment. Millions of borrowers are stuck in limbo due to the long lingering lawsuit over the SAVE plan, which the new law entirely eliminates. The department and its contractors have a Herculean task to process millions of backlogged IDR applications, and then it must create an entirely new repayment plan as a result of the act. I only want the best for the education department and all the people it serves, but there is no way, with its self-inflicted staffing shortage, that it can effectively manage these massive projects. What I fear most about the chaos of this moment is that the American public will lose faith in education and lose trust in its government. Who will ever want to work for the federal government after the way thousands of workers were mistreated? Who will trust that colleges and universities will provide high-quality education that leads to good-paying jobs? And who will trust that if students take out loans, there will be a safety net if they can't afford their loan payments? As a first-generation college student myself, as a Pell Grant recipient and federal student loan borrower, I want all students to have access to affordable and high-quality post-secondary education. The chaos caused by this administration and the One Big Beautiful Bill Act threaten educational opportunity in this country. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. By the way, certain people are very concerned about the reputation of the big, beautiful bill and how unpopular it is. And there are discussions about changing it, giving it another name, something like Support for Working People Bill or something like that. Thank you. I know it's pretty ridiculous. Changing the name is not going to change the negative impact of the ugly bill. Ms. Modika.
Good afternoon, Senator. My name is Mary Modika. I am a 7th grade English language learner educator and proud member of AFT and the Clarkstown Teachers Association. In 2006, with stars in my eyes and music in my ears, I graduated college with a successful internship in Los Angeles, California. But like Cinderella at midnight, my time was drawing near. When my student loans went into repayment, I plunged into poverty. Living in LA, I had to shop at the dollar store for groceries and work 2 jobs to afford rent, gas for my car, and my student loans. But then one day, on my commute, I dinged another car. Paying for that cost me the rest of my savings. I could no longer afford my monthly bills, so I packed my life and I drove back to New York. I moved in with my parents and worked 3 part-time jobs to pay for daily expenses and my student loans. I got lucky, and a friend of mine got me a job at a social media startup. I felt like I was really flourishing until the investment banks started failing. One by one, I watched the investment capital start to disappear. It was like watching a fuse burning down to the dynamite stick at my feet. Kaboom. What I thought was finally going to be my career path blew up. But Sally Mae still had her hand out. Once again, I was working several temporary jobs in order to make payments. All the while, I watched the banks and airlines getting bailed out because they were too big to fail. Why were they getting bailed out, but everyday Americans like me were left behind? That was a long recession, and my student loan interest was accruing, and I was panicking. Then someone told me about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. It was the most viable option because bankruptcy was off the table, although I had considered it. In 2017, I enlisted in New York City's elite teacher training program, where I earned my second master's degree while teaching secondary school. New York City and most of its surrounding areas pay teachers some of the highest salaries in the country. but it is a paltry sum compared to what I could be making in the private sector with 2 master's degrees and my kind of experience. Not to mention in one of the world's most expensive cities to live. I have been scrimping and saving for most of my adult life in order to pay these loans. Loans that have accrued such vulgar amount of interest due to malicious interest rates that left me owing more now than I originally borrowed. Substantially more. It's obscene that I haven't even touched the principal balance yet. I borrowed $80,819.58. It's been almost 20 years since I graduated from college, and now I owe just shy of $100,000. I was unable to buy a house. Not without the luck and circumstance did I find a partner who could. Otherwise, I would still be renting. I certainly couldn't afford to have a child. It is not without saying that in this country, we work to live and we work for our health care. Without a job, how could I afford the physical labor of having a child? Without an adequate income, how could I pay for daycare? In March 2024, I reached my required 10 years of service working in the public sector, and I am still waiting to see the relief that I was promised. Earlier this year, I desperately tried to enroll into a new income-driven repayment plan, one that wasn't the target of right-wing politicians, and I have been left to wait in limbo. For months, I can't get answers from the Department of Education nor my student loan servicer. Now with President Trump's big ugly bill, borrowers like me will be forced to struggle with their debt for even longer and more expensive. College will be even further out of reach for my students. It is cruel, but then again, cruelty is the point. This new law will make it so that only those from rich families will be able to achieve their dreams of higher education. Working class families like mine will be shut out. This is why I am committed to helping my students understand their options, break down the numbers, and always read the fine print. We need to be making it easier for our kids to get the education and training they need to succeed, and not at the expense of living a lifetime in debt. This is certainly not what the crooked people who voted for the big ugly bill are doing. America, what have we become? Thank you.
Thank you for your very descriptive testimony. Thank each of you. So, I can't tell, is this on? Okay. One of the concerns I have is that while all of this is going on, I am wondering, and then each of you can respond to the extent that you're familiar with the awareness of the American public and what is happening with the student loan program for higher education. Do you think the people of America are aware that there are these major changes that make it a lot tougher to go to college because of the changes we're making to the student loan program? Do you think there is widespread awareness of what is happening?
Senator, I think working people across this country are just trying to keep food on the table, are trying to, pick up their kids in time to make it to dance class,
Okay.
covering the cost of childcare. Folks are really struggling, and I don't think they have time to understand how harmful this new law is going to be for them and their families. And so I think it's important for conversations like this so that we can spread awareness.
Do the rest of you agree that there's not a lot of awareness of what's happening in the student loan program?
It's hard to say because the literacy that we need in order to gormandize the news is faltering, and we are experiencing a brain drain in our schools because it's no longer affordable to survive here. So as you were saying, it's impossible to make ends meet. It's even more impossible to expect that people are opening the newspaper to read how these bills are affecting their life, especially the big ugly bill.
And if I may add, with the Department of Education at half capacity because of the mass firings and forcing out so many experts, the department absolutely does not have the people it needs to launch the campaign that would be needed to inform students, families, and student loan borrowers about all of these changes. As I'm sure we'll talk about later today, they have a lot on their plate to accomplish from the problems that are happening currently, let alone the storm that's about to come once the big ugly bill is implemented.
And I will just add, as Bradley mentioned in his testimony, I think what comes to mind with your question is chaos, because that is what most borrowers are experiencing. Even if we ignore what was just passed in the big ugly bill, the new policies, borrowers were already very confused about their options. They had no clue what repayment option they should be on, whether they were going to get public service loan forgiveness, whether their applications were going to be processed. When I left the department, I got a lot of questions from friends, from family, asking, what should they do next? And I still get those questions. And as somebody who lives and breathes this work, I'm even confused. Mm-hmm. So I cannot imagine how confused and just left out in the dark borrowers and families are, and even not just borrowers, but also prospective students, right, that are thinking about where to go to college, how much do they need to borrow, and what that will mean for them down the line.
The situation, therefore, is that for all of the millions of borrowers who are going to be impacted at some level by the big ugly bill, first of all, they need to know they're being impacted. And when you cut the people who are supposed to be at the Department of Education to respond to these questions, of which there are something like a backlog of 27,000 as elicited by Senator Warren's spotlight hearing. So you have that huge group of people who don't know what the changes are. And if you don't know what the changes are, the chances of being in default, I would say, increases. And then you have all the people coming up to facing college tuitions, and they need to understand that things are going to be a lot tougher for them in terms of how much they can borrow and what their repayment. What is if we can think about it in this way, what is the average college tuition, if there is such a thing? Well, what are we talking about?
While I was writing my story down, I checked, and on average, the 1 year of college is about the same as a brand new 4-door sedan.
So that is what?
About $40,000.
$40,000.
And that's the low end.
So when you envision, that's right off the top of anybody's income. And so we don't know how many families, not too many, I would think, who can afford $40,000 a year to send their child to a 4-year college. And we're not even talking about graduate school, because this bill also makes it a lot tougher for graduate education to be supported through loans. Now, what percentage of people who go to college are on a loan program? Whether Pell Grants or, do you know? I mean, are we talking about over 50% of the students?
Yeah, I mean, the rates in which families and students have had to borrow has certainly increased over the years as the cost of college has gotten significantly more expensive. And as a result, more and more folks are struggling on the back end once they graduate and have to navigate a very chaotic, as Roxanne mentioned, a very chaotic repayment system, and a workforce that, wages are not increasing in the same way that families need it in order to keep food on the table and keep folks afloat.
So would you agree that a large number of working class families, their kids have to borrow to go to college?
Absolutely.
Would we agree with that?
Absolutely.
So when we make things a lot tougher for them to borrow through the federal program, then they are going to turn to either they forego college or they're going to turn to the private sector, which I think some of you mentioned that it can be fraught with peril. Why? Does anybody want to expand on what might happen?
I'll tell you from personal experience, I had 1 or 2 private loans, and I've lived through so many recessions at my age that it's unheard of. If I still had those private loans, I would be paying them, and then my wages would be garnished because there would be no way. I've been unemployed through these recessions and underemployed. How can you repay something if you're not bringing in any income? The private loans is a giant scam.
So when borrowers have to take on loans within the private market, it's more expensive because interest rates can be significantly higher than the interest rates in the federal student loan program. And the products themselves are also riskier. Why are they riskier? Because private student loans include less protections should a borrower fall behind. They are ineligible for programs like public service loan forgiveness, which, as Mary mentioned, was the only real pathway for her to ever see a future without student debt. They're also ineligible for programs like income-driven repayment, which allow a borrower to tie their monthly student loan bill to their income. And so as a result, when borrowers fall behind, they're left at the mercy of their lender. And they are also left to kind of flounder if they fall behind. And we know that based on data from the CFPB, private student loan makes up less than 10% of the overarching student loan, outstanding student loan debt in this country, but made up over 40% of complaints that were submitted to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau back when it was functioning and back when it was actually protecting borrowers.
And unfortunately, the U.S. Department of Education doesn't have authority over those companies that provide private student loans. And so she just mentioned the one agency that can help consumers with private education debt is the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. But that was one of the first targets of this administration to close. They tried very hard to fire everybody at the CFPB and shut it down. They're hanging in there, from what I understand. But of course, we need to be strengthening our government watchdogs of these companies, not cutting them down.
So you all have a awareness of the dangers that confront the current borrowers as well as future borrowers. How do we enable the public, aside from doing spotlight hearings like this? Notice there are no Republicans that are involved in this. What can we do to alert the public to all of these kinds of changes that will make it a lot tougher to pursue higher education? Are you pursuing, are in the organizations that you head, are you using social media? Are you generating advocacy people out there who say, wait a minute, this is not what we want in our country?
Oh, absolutely, Senator. I know that many of our organizations are out meeting borrowers and families where they are, bringing resources, whether that's through online, social media, working with elected officials with big platforms to really get the word out. I think the reality is that a lot of these changes are going to start being very real as folks start to figure out where they want to go to school and what their potential financial aid packages could look like. And the fact that these new lending limits could go into effect by next July, that's going to become, that's going to make it very clear what this bill is going to mean for access, as well as all of the chaos that's happening with borrowers.
And I will say that at EdTrust, we have also been engaged with our state offices, because EdTrust has offices in a few states across the country, and then in those states partnering with coalitions, partnering with other organizations to really have resources out in the field to get people to understand what is in this bill. We actually are running a campaign that we've dubbed the Great American Heist, because that is what we think that this bill really is. And trying to explain to students, to borrowers, to families, what is in this bill, what are the potential impacts, and how they can start thinking about the different options, in addition to also trying to advocate at the state level for things that states might be able to implement to support in ways that the federal government has now abdicated their role.
You raise a good point as to whether or not the states can create their own higher ed loan program. Are there any states pursuing that kind of a program? Do you know?
There are states that do have their own kind of state-backed higher ed loan programs.
Such
one
as?
of the things, I know Massachusetts has one. There are several of them that either have stood up these programs or are actively thinking through those. What I would also just caution, however, is that historically there have been investigations that have shown that even when states back higher ed loan programs, we see some of this same problematic practices, abusive debt collection practices that have taken place in the private sector. And so I think what's important is not to meet this moment with more debt that can, really drag down students and families, but really kind of pushing us towards a path where we can see and realize a debt-free future for students who want to pursue a higher education, boosting up financial aid, state grant assistance, et cetera, so that folks are not forced into other types of loan products that have even less oversight and transparency associated with them.
It's you hardly know where to start, because when you think about the lack of federal support for K-12, IDEA, for example, which is millions and millions of dollars to states to enable the states to meet their obligations to students with disabilities, and all that money goes away. What state can come up with the amount of money that's going to be required to support that kind of program? One of you, I think it might have been Ms. Benyes, who talked about the connection between what's happening with student debt and the fact that so many of the students also rely upon Medicaid and SNAP. So that like what percentage do you think of student borrowers rely on these safety net programs?
So we know that 13% of college students access healthcare through Medicaid, and that around 3.8 million students are experiencing food insecurity across our college campuses. So further cuts to Medicaid could result in millions of students losing access to their healthcare. Could mean millions of students exacerbates the food insecurity that millions of students are experiencing. And these cuts don't just affect folks who are hungry or who access healthcare through Medicaid. It's important to remember that, when there are massive cuts to healthcare and to food assistance, historically states have had to fill these budget shortfalls with cuts to public higher education, which ultimately results in just state public higher education institutions increasing college costs even higher. So it's all interconnected, and it's just a perfect storm of really horrible policy that's just going to make college more expensive for families.
Now, there have been massive cuts, too, but maybe half of the Federal Department of Education has been cut, and there are challenges to these cuts. And you have a Supreme Court that said, well, you can go ahead with the cuts, and while the district courts decide whether or not these kinds of firings were legal, it's like, fire first, restore later. Meanwhile, are these people who no longer have jobs, are they supposed to be waiting around for these cases to wend its way in the district court? So it's a very odd way of approaching what's happening. And I think that what the Supreme Court is enabling this regime to do is yet another aspect of what I think it should be education to the public, because as far as I'm concerned, the Supreme Court majority is very much enabling what we call the unitary president, which is massive amounts of power to the executive branch, mainly to the president, to do what he wants. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of cases, lawsuits that have been brought to try and stop Trump from his executive orders and what I would consider to be illegal activities, but that just delays a lot of the harm, the redressing the harm that's already out there. But in the case of the big ugly bill and the actual provisions in the bill that will begin to be implemented soon, and you don't have the staff at the federal level to respond to all these questions, what's supposed to happen, do you think? Chaos, yes. But
Chaos, that's right. And thank you for bringing up the lawsuit in the Supreme Court. That's a good reminder that education staff have not given up, and we are waiting for our day in court. And the other interesting thing about that is some of the people who were terminated, what we're noticing now is that the department is posting jobs for those very same people who were terminated, which first shows that they fired people that they shouldn't have. I mean, none of us should have been fired. We all had important jobs to do, but these folks in particular were so critical that they had to start posting their jobs, which also seems illegal, doesn't it, Senator? There are rules for how reduction in forces are supposed to happen, and employees who are impacted by the reduction in force are supposed to be prioritized when positions are transferred or when those new positions are opening up. So we're watching that right now to see what happens as these new jobs are posting, and we are sure that there will be more of these jobs being posted because they're starting to realize their workload is too much and it wasn't very efficient for them to fire us all.
We do have some video testimony that, where is it going to be shown on? Oh, no wonder, it's behind me. Okay, so I want to get to one of these videos. Michael Kato is an assistant professor at Windward Community College in East Oahu. He was raised in a working class family and worked hard to put himself through college. As a lifelong educator, he should be eligible for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, but when he applied for this program, he could not reach anyone at the FSA, Office of Federal Student Aid, and when he did finally reach someone, they provided conflicting information about his loan. ED cuts have directly impacted his ability to apply for loan forgiveness. So let's watch what he has to say.
To the honorary members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to share my story. Aloha, my name is Michael Kato, and I live and work in the state of Hawaii. I am a descendant of Japanese immigrants who came here as plantation workers. I grew up in a working class family, and I worked hard to put myself through college as a non-traditional student and as an individual diagnosed with ADHD and on the autism spectrum. I've been teaching for over 30 years and co-founded an all-volunteer nonprofit organization which donates ukuleles to elementary schools in marginalized communities like the one I grew up in. I'm currently an assistant professor at Windward Community College, which is part of the University of Hawaii system, and a member of the University of Hawaii Professional Assembly and the AFT. As you know, the federal government loan repayment system seems to be very complicated to the average citizen like me, so forgive me if I'm not up to date with the jargon. I've been diligently making on-time payments on my student loan since I entered repayment, never missing a payment, even when the option of deferment occurred during COVID pandemic. In October 2024, my union held a student debt clinic where I learned about public service loan forgiveness. To my surprise, I learned how close I was to having my loans forgiven, that the years of work as an educator and regular monthly loan payments could soon see my loan balance erased. With help from the AFT, I made my first application for PSLF, where I learned I was a few payments away from my 120 payments, according to the federal student aid. I then decided to enroll in the income-based repayment plan for my final 3 payments. It took several months to process this application, but I was finally placed into the IVR this past spring. The monthly payment was $273, but without explanation jumped to $554, more than double what I had previously paid. Even with the more expensive payment, I completed what I thought was my final payment in the late spring of this year and applied for PSLF. Several weeks later, I received a notification that my application for temporary PSLF was rejected, telling me I only had 117 payments despite FSA's dashboard showing 120 qualifying. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a temporary expanded PSLF. After consulting with my union, I asked for my application to be reconsidered under regular PSLF, and I am still awaiting a decision. While AFT has been very responsive to my questions about a system that is shifting under our feet, I have received very little information from either FSA or Aid Advantage for the last several months. I've called numerous times trying to contact a live representative, only to be directed to an automated message asking me to evaluate my non-existent customer service. When I was lucky enough to reach a representative, FSA blames the servicer blames FSA. No one accepts responsibility, and I get conflicting information about what the issue is and how to fix it, which only confuses me more. No one will follow up on my answers to my questions or requests for written confirmation of what was discussed. With the passage of the One Big Beautiful Act in July, it feels like I have fewer options. There will be fewer qualifying repayment plans for the PSLF that would be more extensive. And it feels like the people who should be on my side in this process at the FSA Ombudsman office are nowhere to be found. And I've dedicated my life to education, and I've done all that's been asked of me to have my loans forgiven. But I really feel like Charlie Brown trying to kick that football. Every time I get so close to forgiveness, the ball is pulled away. I find myself flat on my back once again. I fulfilled my obligations for PSLF, but I feel like my government is not fulfilling its promise to me and other Americans who work in public service. Congress should be making access to affordable repayment and PSLF easier, not harder. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope to receive forgiveness soon, but I don't wish this experience on anyone. Our government can be doing so much more to make PSLF accessible to public workers like myself. And I hope that my story can help create a more just system and help others who are in the same predicament as I am. Aloha.
Do any of you have any kind of a reaction to Professor Kato's
Senator,
concerns? Yes.
I wish Mr. Kato's experience was unique, but unfortunately, for millions of borrowers who are just trying to repay their debt, that experience is far too common. Having to call their student loan servicers, the private companies that get millions of dollars each and every year from our federal government to oversee the student loan system, and wait hours on end just to speak to a human being, or to be referred to an automated system, or back to the servicer's website to get information, all of which is not actionable on their part and is not accurate or not responsive to those borrowers' individual concerns. Getting conflicting information from student loan servicers and customer service representatives, and then getting no response from the CFPB when they submit complaints, or to from the Department of Education's Ombudsman's office. These are all our fellow Americans, all taxpayers, all trying to just do right and pay back their loans, and this is the system that they're trapped in, and under this administration, it's only been made worse.
It certainly breaks my heart to hear Mary's story and this borrower's story that they are so close to public service loan forgiveness, which for the first time ever is actually working, or at least it should be right now. But the mass firings at the Education Department has just ground everything to a halt. And, before my team was fired at the Education Department and others in my office, we put the borrowers first. We prioritized getting good information to our customers, to fighting for these borrowers behind the scenes to either fix their problems or just make sure that they got the answers that they needed. The solution here is easy, which is to hire back the people who were illegally fired and let us get back to work to help the American people.
Do the rest of you?
I I want to send out
Modika.
solidarity to Michael Kato. I had very similar situations since, let me see, on February 16th. I thought very quickly on my feet, and I switched out of the Save Payment Program to the IDR program before everything hit the fan. And then 5 days later, that is when the administration took down those applications. But I had mine in. I have the email that says that my IDR application was received. I am in the ether. There's no response to anything. I cannot pay if I wanted to pay my monthly payments, but I get notices that I've missed payments and I'm behind. But when I log in, it's frozen. There's nothing happening. And for what? I am at the finish line. Let me close my case. It's cruel at this point.
And I will say that the other piece to this, as Mary mentioned, is that for months, borrowers wanted to repay their debt. They wanted to submit their qualifying payments and couldn't because, again, the process was frozen. Applications were not being processed. People were in limbo in the SAVE plan. So borrowers have been wanting to make their payments so that they can reach their PSLF qualifying payments and just weren't able to. So it was just terrible when the Department of Education put out a press release when they were going to start accruing interest, urging borrowers to take action, when borrowers had been wanting to take action for months. So, my heart goes out to the borrowers there are so many that are in that situation, that are so close and are now left with little hope right now.
Senator, if I may just add
yes.
one more piece to that, because I think it's all interconnected. You know, the process has always been very complicated. But what feels different is that we have an administration that is actively trying to put borrowers in a worse position. Earlier this year, as Mary mentioned, they withdrew the application to enroll in IDR. Only until the AFT sued this administration were they forced to put back this online application so that borrowers could get access to repayment options that they are entitled to under federal law. Months later, we hear about this ongoing application backlog. To this day, there is over 1 million applications for folks who are just trying to enroll in a more affordable repayment option. To Roxanne's point, people who are just trying to repay their debts. And then, to add further insult to injury, the administration decides that they want to resume interest and force folks into collections to garnish their wages as a result. It's calloused, and the cruelty is the point.
I think that is a really good point to make, that we have an administration that really does not want to provide assistance. I do have two more video recorded testimony that I'd like to get to. So the first is Melie Kane, who is a third-year college student who attends Hamilton College in upstate New York. She was raised on Maui and Molokai and was the first person in her family to leave Hawaii for college. Her dream is to pursue graduate degrees in public policy and law, but she is worried about the crushing reality of higher education costs. She has serious concerns about what the changes in the Big Ugly Bill will mean for her 5 younger siblings and others in her community. As she puts it, quote, "Is the goal to keep us in poverty, or do we want to all the young people to be able to succeed," end quote. So let's hear from Melie.
Aloha, my name is Melie Kane. I was born and raised on the islands of Maui and Molokai, and I'm a graduate of Molokai High School. I'm a current junior at Hamilton College, and I am the first in my family to leave Hawaii for college on the continent. At Molokai High School, I qualified for free and reduced lunch, just like nearly 75% of my classmates, which meant our entire school received meals through our Title I designation. That experience reflects the reality of my community and communities like mine. For families like mine, the cost of higher education is already crushing. In Hawaii especially, the challenge is even greater. The cost of living is one of the highest in the nation, and for so many families, education is not something the whole family can share the burden of, and too often it falls entirely on the student. And when the median income in our communities doesn't come close to the cost of housing, food, transportation, higher education feels impossible. And that is why the elimination of the Grad Plus loan program utterly terrifies me, because without it, graduate education is simply out of reach for working and middle class families. It does not lower tuition, it does not make education more affordable, but it closes doors for students like me who want to continue our education and for my 5 other siblings who will be coming after me. I dream of earning a law degree and a master's in public policy so that I can give back and return home to Hawaii to work on housing policy and uplift Indigenous voices in the policymaking process. But without programs like Grad Plus, that dream is not accessible as it once was, and it may not even be possible. And my fears extend beyond myself. On Molokai, one of our biggest challenges is that so many of our professionals, doctors, lawyers, veterinarians, dentists, social workers, teachers, policymakers, and the list goes on, are outsourced from off-island because we do not have enough homegrown graduates to fill those roles and give back. Across Hawaii, we have a similar issue. Our communities want to train our young people to be the workforce of the future in these fields. But without crucial financial support and with already unbearable living costs, it becomes impossible for local residents and Native Hawaiians to return home after graduate school to serve their communities. Eliminating Grad Plus does not encourage institutions to lower their costs. Instead, it will push us towards private loans, which are often riskier, more expensive, and predatory. Many families in my community are first-generation college households and navigating this process for the very first time. Financial literacy is not what it should be, and it's pretty low, and I worry that without federal protections, students will be easily taken advantage of and locked into devastating debt by private lenders. So I have to ask, is the goal to keep us below the federal poverty line and keep us in that same Title I designation long after we go through the K-12 system? Or do we want all young people to succeed and have a fair shot at higher education, regardless of the family and financial situation that they were privileged enough to be born into? Should opportunity and a future of financial security belong only to those who already have wealth? Or should it extend to students from rural, predominantly Native Hawaiian and working class communities such as mine? I am terrified not only for myself, but for my other siblings and the next generation of students from Hawaii. I don't want them to inherit a system that punishes students for dreaming big, as we were taught all throughout our education, and punishes them for dreaming of giving back to their communities that raised them. I ask you to see us, not as numbers on a balance sheet, but as young people who want to serve our communities, who want to give back, and who simply need the tools to make that possible. Mahalo for the opportunity to share my story today.
Thank you, Melie. So, thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Yes. Would you like to say a few words, ask some questions?
I would. Thank you. That was really moving, and it was also, I'll get filled in on all your testimony, and I want to thank you all for coming and thank Mazie Hirono, the great senator from Hawaii, for holding this hearing. So I'm going to focus on something a little more specific, which is primary care physicians, rural areas, not having enough doctors. That's true in this area. That is true in Minnesota, and it's becoming a real problem, especially with these rural hospitals closing because of the Medicare cuts in the that were a result of the big debt in the big beautiful betrayal. So could you talk, Ms. Banyas, about how the removal of affordable, flexible federal loan options could force aspiring doctors into higher interest private debt? And then I guess for you, Ms. Garza, we're going to see a shortage of 86,000 physicians by 2036. Instead of eliminating the Grad Plus loan program, removing vital resources, how can we better train and support students? So I'll start with you.
Thank you, Senator. That's so important. I believe it's the American Hospital Association predicts that or estimates that due to this new law, that the law is set to put over 300 rural hospitals at risk of closure due to all of those cuts. And so the reality is that this bill is a complete disaster for rural access to healthcare and to access to the health professionals that are really needed to serve the health needs of rural communities. So as you mentioned, the elimination of the Graduate Plus Loan Program is going to have a very harmful effect on the education of future healthcare professionals. Whether we like it or not, this bill will do nothing to make medical education more affordable. And so, it's going to be future doctors and future nurses who are going to feel the brunt of the elimination of this program, and they're going to be forced to take on private student loans. According to our estimation, it could potentially leave a gap that forces medical students and nursing students to look at potentially trying to secure over $100,000 in private student loans. That's going to be more expensive because of higher interest rates. It's going to be more risky because there's less protections. But that's even if a borrower can even qualify for that much in private student loans, right? And so as a result, if they're unable to secure that financing in the private market, we could see folks abandon their dreams of a medical profession altogether. And that's going to exacerbate the medical professional shortages that you cite that is going to have such a disproportionately negative effect on rural communities in particular.
Ms. Garza.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I agree with everything Aisha just mentioned. I think the limits that have been placed on graduate lending, the elimination of the Grad Plus program, all of these things are going to have terrible impacts on the ability of students to pursue their dreams, to go to medical school, to pursue other professional degrees that we know are very costly. So I think, at EdTrust, we are really thinking about how do we provide more aid to students? I think it's important that we continue to have ways for students to borrow money to attend these very costly programs, but I think we also need to be providing more aid to students. We need to be increasing the amount of need-based aid at the state level. That is also something that we have been talking to states about.
Quick comment on TRIO, just because I heard today about a Minnesota college administrator. I heard about some TRIO cuts.
Yes, so that.
Big supporter of it.
Yes, we are definitely also big supporters of the TRIO program, which we know are instrumental in helping students not only at the K-12 level, but transition to post-secondary education. We know that it is a vital program to provide support for pathways for students, particularly low-income students, first-generation students, to go on to higher education and succeed in higher education. So the recent freeze in TRIO grants is extremely concerning. I think, like a lot of other programs that this administration has either chose to all of a sudden freeze or withhold or cancel or reallocate funding. I think one theme of this hearing so far has been chaos, thanks to Bradley, not because of you, but for bringing that theme into existence, is that this is creating chaos on our schools and our college campuses because they don't know what's happening with the funding.
Well, and I think just filing FAFSA, all these things, and I know Dr. Kuster and Ms. Modika, that you have referenced this in your testimony, but these firings and having people leave from the department gives what is already a difficult thing for students to figure all this out. Any parent that's had a kid in college and is trying to figure it all out knows exactly what this is like. And that's just going to have a long-term horrific effect on, and it's also not a fair thing because kids that need the aid or need help are going to be more hurt by this. They're going to be the roadkill over other kids that maybe have resources.
That's absolutely right. Students and families don't deserve what's happening to them, and the hundreds, thousands of federal workers who were fired illegally didn't deserve that either. And sticking with TRIO, there is no office within the education department that was not affected in some way by the mass firings or forcing out people. So in addition to the administration cutting TRIO funding, the people who operate those TRIO fundings at the education department are also at lower capacity. And so we really need to get our education department staffed back up to be able to run all the programs that they're statutorily obligated to do so.
Okay.
I don't know. I am tearing up. I am emotional to hear that the students that I devote my life to will be completely unable to afford just like the minimum of higher education. Not for nothing, if they want to be a doctor. I mean, we are living in once in a lifetime illnesses that are coming more than once in a lifetime, and we should be investing in our youth and in the future to combat these things. It's just very upsetting. Not even for me, for the
I
future.
can see your passion for these kids, and I just want you to know we're doing everything we can, including with this upcoming budget, to stand with all of you in your work. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We have one more video testimony that I'd like to show. Marian Iris Ramos is a third-year college student who attends Barnard College in New York City. She was raised on Oahu and is the first person from her family to attend college. Her dream is to pursue a graduate degree in education, but she's worried about the changes in the Big Ugly Bill and worried about the cuts at the Department of Education. As she put it, quote, "These cuts are a direct attack on our livelihoods, on who gets to have a voice," end quote. Let's hear from Mariah.
Hi, my name is Mariah Iris Ramo. I am a Filipino migrant, a first-generation college student, and a third-year urban studies major at Barnard College of Columbia University. I rely heavily on financial aid to pursue my education. Every year, I have to consistently fight for a better aid package, and this year it was especially difficult given the unexpected health expenses of my family. I have long dreamed of pursuing grad studies in public policy, especially in the education field, but with the cancellation of the Grad Plus loan program, my path just feels uncertain. And I know that I am not alone. These changes affect more than just me. They ripple across so many communities. Over the summer, I joined a youth roundtable with my peers to discuss exactly how we feel about these ongoing budget cuts and educational policy changes, and I really wanted to take the time today to bring their voices into the table. One student shared that cuts to after-school programs forces parents to reduce work hours or leave children in unsafe conditions. Another spoke of losing access to research opportunities abroad because her studies simply involved words like woman and sustainability. Other students shared experiences of trauma, seeing peers arrested, censored, doxxed for speaking out against injustice. ICE raids in schools and communities amplify this fear, leaving lasting impacts on mental health and safety. Access to financial aid is also inequitable, with FAFSA requirements and complicated application processes creating so many barriers for many students. That's to say that these cuts are a direct attack on our livelihoods, on family structures and dynamics, on knowledge production and sharing, on who is surveilled and who is criminalized, and who gets to have a voice. They shape the world we live in now and the one that the future generations will inherit. We're told time and time again that education is supposed to be the space to become better citizens, learning from and with each other. But I think to myself, how can we truly do that if the very resources, spaces, and opportunities to learn are being cut off, often without input from the communities being affected? So today, I urge you to reconsider these decisions, to support education, to support families, support communities, to support the future of students like me and for generations to come. Thank you for your time.
We are nearing the end of our hearing, and again, this is being live streamed, and really, I'd like to ask each of you, aside from if these are these are stories that are going to be replicated literally millions of times over with all of the borrowers out there. One more thing, in addition to some of the changes that are massive changes that are being made, there's also discussion about moving the entire loan program to SBA, one of the smallest, Small Business Administration, one of the smallest agencies, and they're also being cut. So that is adding insult to injury. It's going to lead to further chaos. I would think, Dr. Kuster, do you think that's not such a great idea?
That's right. And Senator, I think you and I would agree first of all, that moving the federal student loan portfolio to any other agency would be illegal. That's something that only Congress can do. Federal law says that the Secretary of Education is the person who must oversee the student loan program. So first we have to get through that hurdle before they make the bad decision of moving it to an agency that, as you said, is not experienced enough, does not have the qualifications to operate the federal student loan program.
So I'd like to close by thanking each of you for being here. And I think that there's work for us to do, because I frankly don't think, this is the third of the Education Spotlight hearings I'm doing, and I don't think that there's enough awareness on the part of the American public where education should be, whether you have a child or not, should be basically a foundational kind of a question for the strength of our country as a nation, to be a leader in so many areas. And if you don't have a population that at least can access, everyone should have the opportunity. And I'm not saying that everybody should go to college, but there should be that opportunity to go and to raise the awareness, I think, is what I would like to ask all of you, each of you, to assist us with. And clearly, this bill is already law. So while we are going to advocate to eliminate the harmful impacts of this change, you kind of need to have other people who are understanding and supportive of it. So I would ask each of you if you have suggestions, ideas on how we can get the point across to the public that education is foundational. And for those of us, I think there are at least several people on the panel for whom you are the first in your family to go to college. All of you?
All of us.
Okay, so I can relate. I am an immigrant. I'm the first in my family to go to college, first and only, in fact. English not being a second language. And you said that 45% of the students in our colleges are from minority groups, and that is also being challenged because of the Supreme Court's decision in the Harvard case. So all across the board, there are challenges to what we're going to do to support education, and I thank each of you for being here. And my expectation is that you will help us come up with ideas on how we can get the point across to the American people how important supporting education is and how important it is to retain the Federal Department of Education and all of its attendant programs intact, in spite of this administration's viewpoint. So mahalo to each of you. Stay safe. Take care. Aloha.
Senator.
Thank you.